The Ford Model A Sport Coupe is one of those timeless cars that carries the spirit of classic American motoring. Even though the original Model A series dates back to the late 1920s and early 1930s, by 1976 this style was seen as a prized antique, a rolling reminder of the early automotive days. In this video, we'll explore the Ford Model A Sport Coupe in detail, its origins, design, driving experience, and its special place in automotive history, but also what it meant to enthusiasts during the mid-1970s when nostalgia for pre-war cars was at an all-time high. The original Ford Model A was produced from 1927 to 1931 as the successor to the legendary Model T. Henry Ford knew he couldn't ride on the Model T forever. Technology, style, and customer expectations were changing. The Model A introduced more modern engineering, a better transmission, more power, and a completely new body style lineup. Among these, the Sport Coupe stood out for blending the open-air experience with the sophistication of a fixed-roof look. Unlike the Roadster, which was purely open, the Sport Coupe had a solid roof and faux landau irons on the side, giving it a touch of elegance. By 1976, the Model A Sport Coupe was already more than 4 decades old. But this was the period when classic car restoration had truly taken off in America. Car clubs were thriving, antique auto shows were popping up in nearly every state, and the Ford Model A was one of the most beloved collectibles. People were searching for authentic examples, restoring them to their original glory, and sometimes even customizing them into hot rods. For the purists, though, keeping a Sport Coupe stock was the real treasure. Let's start with the looks. The 1930-1931 version of the Model A Sport Coupe had a slightly more modern appearance compared to the earlier years. It had a 2-door coupe body with a canvas-covered roof, chrome radiator shell, wire spoke wheels, and a sporty yet refined stance. The rear had a rumble seat, a fold-up seat in the trunk area that could carry 2 extra passengers. The top had a soft vinyl covering with faux convertible hardware, so it looked stylish but wasn't actually a folding top. In 1976, seeing one of these fully restored with period-correct colors like Washington blue, chicle drab, or andalusite blue was like stepping back into a bygone era. Under the hood, the Ford Model A Sport Coupe carried a 201 cubic inch L-head inline-4 engine, producing around 40 horsepower. By today's standards, that sounds tiny, but in the late 1920s, it was a big step up from the Model T's 20 horsepower. The engine was paired with a 3-speed manual transmission with a floor-mounted shifter. Top speed was about 65 miles per hour, though most owners in 1976 weren't pushing them that hard. These cars were mainly for parades, Sunday drives, and car shows. Driving one required skill, because there was no synchromesh in the transmission, meaning double clutching was necessary for smooth shifts. Inside, the Model A Sport Coupe offered simplicity with charm. The dashboard was a flat metal panel with a cluster in the center, including an ammeter, fuel gauge, and ignition controls. The seats were upholstered in mohair or leatherette, and the cabin had little in the way of insulation, meaning you heard and felt every movement of the car. In the 1970s, owners who restored them often kept the interior faithful to original specifications, right down to the pull cord assist straps and the manual windshield wiper on the driver's side. One of the key reasons the Model A Sport Coupe remained popular in 1976 was its accessibility. Compared to many other vintage cars, Model As were relatively affordable and parts were widely available thanks to reproduction companies and dedicated clubs like the Model A Ford Club of America. This meant that an average car enthusiast could find a Sport Coupe in decent shape and bring it back to life without spending an astronomical amount of money. It was also mechanically simple, which made it a great project car for those learning about vintage auto restoration. The driving experience of the Ford Model A Sport Coupe is nothing like modern cars. In 1976, when muscle cars like the Pontiac Trans Am or Chevrolet Camaro were ruling the streets, the Sport Coupe was from an entirely different universe. You didn't just turn the key and go. Starting it involved turning on the fuel shutoff under the dash, setting the spark advance and throttle levers on the steering column, pulling the choke, and then pressing the starter button. The steering was heavy at low speeds, the brakes were mechanical rather than hydraulic, and the ride was bouncy on leaf springs. But that's exactly what gave it character. You were connected to the road in a raw, mechanical way. By the mid-1970s, the cultural significance of the Model A had grown tremendously. Television shows, movies, and advertising often used cars like the Sport Coupe to evoke a sense of nostalgia. This was also around the time when the US was celebrating its bicentennial in 1976, and Americans were embracing symbols of the past. Seeing a shiny ModelASportCoupe in a 4th of July parade fit perfectly with the patriotic mood of the era. Collectors in 1976 had a few different approaches. Some aimed for total authenticity, tracking down every correct part, matching original paint colors, and even using era-correct upholstery materials. Others went for mild customization, maybe swapping in hydraulic brakes for safety, or adding turn signals, which the originals didn't have. A few went the hot rod route, dropping in V8 engines and lowering the suspension, but those modified cars were more often based on roadsters or Tudors, while sport coupes were more likely to be preserved. In terms of performance, even by 1976 standards, the sport coupe wasn't a fast car. 0 to 60 took forever, and hills required careful gear management. But it excelled in delivering smiles. The rumble seat was especially fun for kids or adventurous passengers who didn't mind riding in the open air. At car shows, the sport coupe drew crowds because it was a perfect example of the late 1920s to early 1930s American automotive style: upright grille, separate fenders, running boards, and a classy roofline. Maintenance in 1976 for a Model A Sport Coupe wasn't overly complicated. Owners often did their own oil changes, greased all the fittings regularly, and kept an eye on the mechanical brake adjustments. Parts suppliers like Snyder's Antique Auto Parts and Braddon's Antique Auto Parts were already serving the growing Model A community, ensuring that owners could find everything from spark plugs to entire reproduction fenders. One interesting fact about the Model A Sport Coupe is that it was marketed as a stylish but affordable option in its day. In 1930, the price for a new Sport Coupe was around $540, which was still within reach for many middle-class Americans. That's part of why so many were built, and why a decent number survived into the 1970s to become restoration projects. By 1976, insurance companies also recognized antique cars as special vehicles. Many owners had special classic car insurance policies that required limited mileage and storage in a garage. This kept a lot of sport coupes in good condition, as they weren't daily drivers anymore. They were hobby cars, often pampered and showcased. Driving a Model A Sport Coupe in 1976 also connected you with a strong community. Model A clubs organized tours, where dozens of cars would travel together on scenic routes, often attracting waves from bystanders. These events were social gatherings as much as they were driving experiences. Owners shared restoration tips, swapped spare parts, and enjoyed the camaraderie of keeping history alive. The Model A's 4-cylinder engine had a unique sound, a steady putter that could be heard from a distance. At lower speeds, you could hear the mechanical valves and the whir of the transmission. The smell of unburned gasoline from the simple carburetor design was part of the sensory experience. In 1976, this mechanical symphony stood in stark contrast to the muffled, more refined engines of contemporary cars. As the years have passed, the Ford Model A Sport Coupe's value has remained strong among collectors. In 1976, you could still find running examples for a few $1,000s, though the most perfectly restored ones could fetch much more. Today, of course, prices have risen significantly for original or properly restored cars. In summary, the Ford Model A Sport Coupe in 1976 was more than just a car, it was a living piece of history. It represented the leap from the basic, almost primitive Model T to a more modern and stylish era of Ford automobiles. For enthusiasts in the 1970s, owning one was both a point of pride and a way to preserve America's automotive heritage. Whether it was parked at a local show,